Now, I just want to speak very, very briefly today about what this series is all about and how it came into being. As some of you will know, Tuesday afternoons at 4 o'clock have become something of an institution at the Humanities Center. We always have these events, and we love them. In the spring of last year, we assembled a series of fascinating and probing panel discussions on the new political landscape. That's a landscape which, of course, now seems about 1,000 years old, at least to me. And then last semester, our sessions revolved around the exploration of certain dangerous ideas. Now, our aims this semester and for the following 2 semesters are more ambitious and are tied very closely to the life of our campus, to contours of the Catholic intellectual tradition, and to the interrogation of the human condition that is, of course, the guiding purpose of our work here in the centre. We're going to be focusing on the ideas of beauty, goodness, and truth, ideas that constituted the very basis of the existence of USD when it was founded. We'll hear more about that later. Our intention is to devote an entire semester to an investigation into each of those founding principles. So this semester it's beauty. In the fall we will look at goodness, and in the spring of 2019 our focus will be on truth. So the question obviously arises, why do this in 3 semesters? Why make this exercise so drawn out and long-winded? It's true, I suppose, that we could have dealt with the entire topic of beauty, goodness, and truth in 1 semester. We could have done it maybe in one session altogether. We just squeeze them all together and talk about all these things. But to do so would be to promote an illusion that these ideas are all very straightforward and uncontroversial. And of course they're not. These concepts are, in fact, essentially contested and controversial. So it's never going to be enough to emblazon these words, isolated on banners or web pages, or as I once saw in Souls on a bookmark. It just says beauty, truth, and good, beauty, goodness, and truth. So there you go. That's all you need to know about it. Once we've isolated that those ideas have something to do with the mission and foundation of USD, the heavy lifting work still has to be done. What do we mean by beauty? What kinds of things can rightfully be thought of as being beautiful? How does one distinguish the beautiful from the ugly? And on what grounds? What are the historical and social forces that have produced our concept of beauty? We talk glowingly about the beautiful, but has this notion in fact been an oppressive one? And if so, who has it oppressed? Who has it benefited? And that's only a tiny sample of the questions that attend an investigation into beauty. And we haven't even touched on goodness and truth yet. So there are really compelling reasons for taking our time over these matters and to resist the spirit of the times, which tends to want to do things at speed with the shortest amount of patience and effort, ideally in 280 characters. So here we are. In this series, we're going to approach the idea of beauty from a vast range of perspectives, drawing on the disciplines of philosophy, theology, art, music, mathematics, natural science, and more, to build up a composite picture of what is meant by beauty, to explore diverse and competing conceptions of the beautiful, and to subject that concept to critique from a number of quarters. For example, feminism and post-colonial thought. Now, putting this program of events together has been a very exciting and imaginative exercise for a lot of people, and I hope you'll join us every Tuesday to see how this series unfolds. I also want to say about this series that it's largely peopled in-house. This is a decision, not just because USD folks are cheaper than getting external speakers, but there's an extraordinary array of intellectual talent on this campus, and you don't really need to extend far beyond the bounds of the campus to get great speakers on this subject. Now, one of the things that's a constant reminder of the Centre's attention to beauty is our gorgeous gallery here. It's now, excitingly I think, equipped to exhibit video art. This is the only gallery space on campus with the capacity for video installations. And this was put in, the work was done over the Christmas vacation, and the first video installation by the college's own Victoria Fu is currently on display here. We're really very honoured to be able to display work of this significance. And the gallery will be open during the reception after our speeches. So please do immerse yourselves in Victoria's extraordinary piece. This is incidentally the first of 3 exhibitions in the centre this spring. And the details of all of these can be found in the Humanities Center events calendar. Please take a copy when you leave. Please also sign up for our email newsletter. So it gives me really great pleasure to introduce today's principal speaker, Sister Virginia Rodee. Sister Rodee is a member of the Society of the Sacred Heart. She attended the Academy of Our Lady of Peace and the San Diego College for Women, which later became the University of San Diego. She earned her bachelor's degree here in 1957 and her Master of Arts in English in 1974. Sister Rodee spent 22 years in Korea teaching at the Sacred Heart College for Women, now known as the Catholic University of Korea. She subsequently worked for 6 years in Rome, training religious of the Sacred Heart from 23 countries around the world. Returning to USD, she became Assistant Vice President for Mission and Ministry, a position from which she has recently retired. Honored in 2007 as a Coronado Legend for her contribution to women's education, she is an absolutely treasured and loved member of the USD community. So please join me in welcoming Sister Virginia Rodee.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was very generous of you. And I really want to thank Brian for beginning this series on beginning of focusing on beauty, goodness, and truth, which were so important in the founding spirit of USD. So I hope to touch on just, I can't do it all, but just part of it in talking about the role of goodness, beauty, and truth in the university and the history. And I know that there are people in this room who know a lot about the history and the beauty and the art. So please, even at the end, if you would like to say anything or have comments, I'd be so happy for that. But since this first semester is dedicated more to the beauty, I'll focus on that, but still take up beauty, goodness, and truth. There's much, much more on goodness and truth yet to be said. It was Mother Rosalie Hill, who first used that expression, which many of us know. Beauty will attract them, goodness will lead them, and the truth will hold them. And we have them on cards, we have them in different places at the university. But I'd like to just take a look at that. And I knew Mother Hill when she was here, and from her perspective, what was she talking about? What did she mean by that? I think that she meant beauty certainly would initially attract persons here, primarily students, but I would say everyone, faculty, staff, students, guests, grandparents, whoever comes to the university. Usually the first thing they say is how beautiful this campus is, and it's true. And I don't know if that's only in the venue, the place, and the architecture, and maybe, possibly, its proximity to the ocean for surfing. But anyway, it has many aspects of attracting. But Mother Hill, in using those three, beauty, goodness, and truth, she wasn't thinking of them as separate, but as a composite, and that they were dynamic and one led to the other. So when she mentioned beauty has the power to attract, but goodness has the power to lead, she meant that beauty had a certain dynamism that really pushed us, prompted students to look for a certain goodness. And we could say a lot about just goodness, another philosophical notion, but Mother Hill was very broad in her thinking. When she spoke about goodness, in this sense, it could be interpreted, I think, in many ways. Dedication, commitment, depth, integrity, whatever, were elements of that goodness. But we will be talking about that more next semester. So, but very importantly, this beauty and goodness would lead to the truth, is what was the multiple and diverse expressions of truth wherever it could be found. And of course, the university was very different in the early days than it is now. But I think those three things, the beauty, goodness, and truth, still are at work and influence and are at work in the university. But for Mother Hill, she believed very strongly in the power of beauty to attract the mind and heart for God. She was a religious of the Sacred Heart, and her focus was on God. But for her, beauty, God was the source of all beauty. But she never forced that on anybody. She never talked about it. In fact, she never talked about beauty. She just surrounded all those here with beauty, and you would catch it. You would live in it. And then she said, for this reason, she felt it was a very solemn obligation or duty of educators to work with the Creator in developing the powers of the human mind and heart. But in any way, any possible way of developing the mind and heart, she was open to all different ways. In an address that she gave in 1939, she talked about beauty. We have many inexpressible and inexhaustible treasures of beauty in the church, catacombs, altars, arches, symbols, etc. But down through the ages, art has formed, has many expressions in architecture, in sculpture, in painting, stained glass, music, whatever. But she warned not to be superficial or lack seriousness in approaching beauty. Something else she said, and this is a quote, "We must remember that material beauty begins with an appeal to the senses, but we must end with an appeal to the spirit, or else be untrue to lead the soul to God, the all-beautiful." So for her, there was something of the spiritual and the theocentric in beauty, and naturally. But I think we can interpret it in different ways. Whether we use the name God or don't use the name of God, beauty, I think, does have a spiritual quality, and that was very important to her here at USD. It goes beyond ourselves, something that's nameless and wordless, almost, in many ways. So before getting into a talk or more about beauty, I'd like to talk about the two players, Bishop Buddy and Mother Hill, who collaborated in this effort for beauty. They were the real key players in the beginning. Bishop Buddy was named bishop here in San Diego in 1936, came in 1937, and soon realized that he needed an institution of higher education. His area was from Los Angeles to the border and from the Pacific Ocean over to the other Arizona border. So he really wanted a place of academic excellence for those in his diocese, his vast, very huge diocese. He met Mother Hill in 1937 at the San Francisco College for Women, but it wasn't until later, 1942, when he invited her to come here. But Bishop Buddy knew that Mother Hill's and the charism of the Religious of the Sacred Heart is education, and he was very deliberate in the choice. He also wanted the Jesuits. That's another story, though. He didn't succeed, for different reasons, but we can take that up at another time. But he invited her to come, and she readily said yes, that she would like to come to Southern California. But because of World War II, it was impossible to have any really serious efforts for building or starting. But she did come in 1945 and took up residence down in Old Town, a place where many of you may know. It's the Tourist Bureau today, across from the a church called the Immaculate Conception there on the corner. And if you look carefully, it still has the 4 crosses on the building around the top. And the buses come and go, and people get out, and a lot of commercial activity there. But nonetheless, that's where the beginning of the university really started, down in Old Town. Mother Hill, I knew Mother Hill because she was the honorary president of the university at that time. And I was a student, and if you were bold enough, you could ask for a visit, which I did because I was really curious about her. She was short in stature, but very kind, very kindly, but she had these intense blue eyes, and if you wanted to ask her a deep question, you knew she'd give it consideration, and she was wonderful to visit with. Her family came from England and settled in Maryland, and it was a very prominent family. In fact, George Washington, when he was looking for donors for the nation's capital, chose or accepted, there were 4 donors, and 2 were her relatives. Daniel Carroll and Notley Young were their names. But Charles Carroll, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, was also one of her relatives. So she moved in circles in Washington, was her place. But for our purposes here, it was her maternal grandmother who really figured in her history. She taught her when she would visit how to do sketches of houses and how to use quadrilles to build houses. And she utilized that in building the San Diego College for Women, which was the first institution. So what are the elements of beauty here at USD that I think she contributed or had a great part in? One was the site, and there's a great story behind searching for the place of the property. Sites that were considered at that time was out in Point Loma, where Nazarene University is now. It was a theosophical society. It wasn't even an educational institution. But she felt it was very restricted because of you couldn't expand it all, and transportation or accessibility was also limited. But other properties, it was interesting. Over in Loma Portal, there were 3 other beautiful properties, but they couldn't rezone them for educational use. So they proceeded further, and Bishop Buddy found a big one, 94 acres out near State College, near University and El Cajon Avenues, and he very much wanted that. They had been searching for 3 years just for the property, and he wanted to get going. But he didn't go with her that day. She went with the treasurer, and they walked the property, and at the end, she said, "I didn't like it at all. The land was underdeveloped and not in the best part of the city." But came back, she didn't want to tell Bishop Buddy because she knew he'd be immensely disappointed. But, and he said that was a Black Tuesday for him. It was really, he needed to get going here, and he had the money and wanted to start. But she held out, and fortunately she did. And down here on Linda Vista Road, when they spotted the mesa, she inquired, "What's up there? Is that possible? Look at the view." And it was a companion to across where the Presidio is. She had an eye for beauty, and she was the one who spotted it and asked him to look into it. And he said, "It belongs to the government. It was used as a fortification during the war to protect the harbor." And he said, "It's just too involved to deal with the government." And she said, "Why don't you go ahead?" And she pushed him a little, and he did. And the government was ready to sell it. They had no use for it at that time. But there was a problem, too. Parcels of it were owned by the original Pueblo families. And but he got his lawyer friends. He thought lawyers were very important. So he had his lawyer friends in the city help him secure the property, so he got the whole of it. And they could have gone all the way up into Linda Vista, but they said, we don't need that property. Think of it today if we had it, but so it was in the history. But Bishop Buddy offered her any 15 acres that she wanted. What a question. On any part of the hill that you would like. And she said, I would like the western end with the view of the Pacific Ocean. She didn't describe it to him. And the Mission Bay and the beautiful site at the western end. And he gave that to her, as well as that was 15 acres, and then it was increased to 22, and finally to 65. So it would include Souls and all of that, all the western part. And he gave it gratis. He owned all the land, but he gave it gratis to the society if it would be used for educational purposes, and she intended to do that. So the site makes a huge impact on the beauty. She had the place. But then it was the architecture, which was the second consideration. And she wanted to build in the old style, something that reflected California, but the roots in the old world. And so she asked our religious in Spain, we're an international society, and she asked our sisters in Spain to assist her in identifying what that would be. And in preparing this, I came across an interesting note from one of those Spanish sisters who wrote, Mother Hill was so good to them during the war when they were suffering a lot for all the lacks, that she was so happy to be able to do something. So she sent books and pictures and examples, and especially pictures of the University of Alcalá. And so Mother Hill, down in that convent, began to make sketches and quadrilles. She built the hallways and the classrooms, if you can imagine, in Founders and in Camino. And we still have a lot of those in the archives. It would really make an interesting study. But the characteristics, and if you walk around campus, you begin to open your eyes to the beautiful Roman arches every place, the rounded, soft arches, and the beautiful decorative part over the front doors. And then on the top, the lace you see at the top, with the finials, those funny little things that go up. In the beginning, they were made of concrete, but with our fire and earthquake regulations, they're all plastic on the new buildings. But anyway, they're very distinctive. And people have told or remarked the Paseo de Calaches has really shown off the buildings much, much more. You can really see the decorative part, the features of the Spanish Renaissance. But it was Mother de Leon who was the treasurer. There are lots of stories about her. She was like a financial wizard. But she'd had a lot of experience in draftsmanship. So she started drawing the real architectural plans, of course, which amazed the architect, who was from Washington, D.C., but they terminated that architect and used Mr. Frank Hope, well known here in San Diego at that time. But Mother Hill was very useful, utilitarian and efficient. And she said, it's not more expensive to build something beautiful than something ugly. Well, I don't know about the logic of that. It usually works the other way. But in any case, she needed finance to start the buildings. And at that time, it was $4 million that she needed. This is 1946. And so she approached Mr. Giannini, who was the first president of the Bank of America in San Francisco, whom she had dealt with many times. She had borrowed from him other times, and asked him for a loan of $4 million. I forgot to say the Society of the Sacred Heart didn't have $4 million, so she had to even get permission to borrow that much money. But I checked with Steve Conroy, asking, what would that be in our currency or dollars today? Venture a guess? 4 million in 1946 would equal approximately, he says, 55 million to begin, if you can imagine. That was courageous. People didn't have that kind of money. But to her credit, she paid it back by 1957, selling off other parcels of land in Omaha, Chicago, Seattle. Everyone suffered in the society for the San Diego College for Women. And you still hear that. I was in San Francisco recently, and they said, oh, the faculty, they were all the ones who had gotten their doctorates and were ready to go, were taken for San Diego. But nonetheless, she wanted it to really be successful. So with her, that financing, she got the $4 million. But when Mr. Giannini asked her, what's your collateral? What are you going to give me for this? And her answer was, my word. I guess he was stunned, but gave her the loan of $4 million, interest-free. And she paid it back, as I said, by 1957. One thing, the architecture is one thing, but one consideration. But another is the integration of architecture here at USD. It's not one building or another building, and you've been on university campuses where you see, lots of different kinds of architecture. But the integration of the architecture, Bishop Buddy followed suit. He knew she knew what she was doing, and so he followed suit and adopted the same style. And since that time, a Board of Trustees passed a resolution that all buildings on campus would be of that style. So maybe that's why we're named the most beautiful campus in the United States. I don't know, but the integration of the architecture is very important too. But I'd like to point out some other aspects that people don't usually think about. Mother Hill had a great appreciation for nature, and you notice every place, all the classrooms open up on patios or walkways. Even here, you can look out and see beauty at all times. She wanted that beauty to come in to the person, and that was important, that experience of nature. Also, the furnishings. People in the beginning in San Diego, when they came up to this university and saw the furnishings, were like, oh, it's like a museum. Where did they come from? Actually, they came from a home in San Francisco. It's called the Flood Home. Mr. Flood was a very successful silver miner in Nevada and built a beautiful mansion on Broadway, which overlooks the San Francisco Bay with the Golden Gate Bridge and the Bay Bridge. And at the time of his death, his widow, Mrs. Flood, said she had no need for that building, offered it to Mother Hill for educational purposes, and it's still a school today, a secondary school there. So she, the furnishings were not needed for the school. She, I don't want to say stripped the school, but brought a lot down. These were all stored down in that little convent, and finally they had to hire a guard outside to keep all the accumulation because they were, afraid that it would be taken. But the chandeliers, the beautiful ones in Shiley Theater, I think there are 3, the center and 2, are probably the most magnificent on campus, as are the 2 tapestries are the most precious, but there are others in other places on campus, all the foyers, the entrance halls, but they all came from that Flood home in San Francisco. It really is a place of beauty, and I think not ostentatious. But if you go in, the first thing you notice right away is that rare dose. That is very central, and that was intended. Everything else is kind of dark in there. But that rare dose goes from the ceiling, from the floor up to the ceiling. It's made of cedar wood that often if you're in there at night or at other times, you smell the beautiful cedar. It's lovely, really. And it's hammered or embossed with gold, and it is really very beautiful. I still make discoveries. I was in there the other day looking the symbols. It's so rich. You could give a lecture just on the rare dose. It's so intricate. But the other part there to notice is the main altar, which is back against the rare dose. It's of Botticini marble, very beautiful white marble. And in the center, lower center there, you see two peacocks drinking from a cup of grapes. And the grapes really are a prefiguring of the Eucharist, the precious blood. But they're elegant in their beauty. But what isn't known, there was a companion piece to that gorgeous altar, the lectern, which is now, no one here from the Immaculata, I don't think. Anyway, it's over in the Immaculata, and it was given at a certain point because of the more recent altar that's out in front, the wooden one. They wanted the lectern to match that, but it is of wood. But I hope someday the lectern comes back to the Immaculata. I'll be there cheering if it comes. But anyway, it's a beautiful piece also. But the coffered ceiling, she was so ingenious about borrowing from every place. Anything good she saw, she would utilize in another way. The coffered ceiling is very typical of the Spanish Renaissance with the blue background and the beautiful Tudor rose inset there. But she borrowed that from the Flood mansion that I mentioned. That was the ceiling of the dining room. And she said, oh, this is great. We'll just use this in the chapel here. People don't know those things, but it's beautiful. But what happened, Bishop Buddy said the same. He said, oh, I like this too. I'm going to use it in the Immaculata. So if you go in the Immaculata, it's a rounded ceiling, but it's the same Tudor rose and the beautiful inset there. It's very, very grand. The Immaculata is certainly grander than the Founder's Chapel. But the stained glass windows, too, have a story. They were made in Chicago. She wanted local firms and firms in the United States. She wasn't searching elsewhere. But the beautiful stained glass windows, of course, depict scenes, gospel scenes. But they're very noteworthy, just from an artistic point of view, for the flora and the water. I don't know if that was intended for San Diego or what, but the flora, animals, unusual in stained glass windows. And there was an artisan here on campus 3 years ago to repair them. And I said, oh, this will be an opportunity to ask him, what are these windows, or what are they worth, or what does he think? And when I asked him, he said, excluding beautiful churches in the East, older, beautiful churches, the windows in this chapel are the best I've seen in Western United States. So it's the quality of the colors that is just so magnificent. Another feature that's really kind of funny is the choir stalls, the seats on the side, which are most uncomfortable if you ever have to go to a concert or anything there. Where's Mary Ann? Is here? Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. When there are no seats left, people get into the choir stalls there. But they really came about. Mother Hill, well, she needed wood, and there was a construction company here who had a lot of Philippine mahogany, and she said, "I'll take it all. You want to sell it all at a go?" And she said, "I'll take it all," and they stored it down in Old Town again, and. But it was good for carving, and there's some beautiful, there's 68 matching stalls or choir stalls, and they were used by the religious for prayer certain times of the day, and that's why they're called choir stalls. But it took an artisan 1 year to carve all the symbols there. But very interestingly, on the back side, probably right near the entrance, the back side of the church, that was where Reverend Mother Hill, we called her Reverend Mother Hill, Mother Hill and Mother Deland, the officers of the university, sat. And there, if you notice, the symbols are quite different. They are all of the Most Holy Trinity. And the reason for that is that it was a custom in our society that every house or institution had a patron or a saint. And she said, well, we won't have a saint here. We'll just have the Most Holy Trinity. That's the highest you can go. And so the back choir stalls have beautiful symbols of the Trinity. But very interestingly, if you look carefully, there are two which are the Star of David. They're intertwined triangles. And I don't know if that was deliberate on our part, But I know Mother Hill was very open and very broad-minded, and I would think would want that. But also, very interestingly, the doors of all the Founders Chapel, if you look at the plate on the doors that push open there, there's a Muslim symbol. And I wonder if that's, you know, the Moorish influence upon the Spanish architecture or deliberate on her part. But it's very interesting to see that. And one other thing I thought of last night, I'd forgotten this. Terry Whitcomb was here as the first institutional design director. And she asked her daughter, who was in India, if she would commission a covering for the tabernacle where the Eucharist is reserved there in the middle. And she wanted something very delicate, almost like opaque, that you could see through, woven with gold. And so they commissioned this. And when Terry's daughter went to get it, the artist said, and she said, "What shall I pay, or what do I owe you?" And the artist said, "This is a gift." He was a Hindu. "This is a gift from my God to your God." So you know, we live in a world, there are many different beliefs, many ways to find God or the ultimate of the spiritual. But that too is very beautiful, and she was delighted about that. There's a story in Ending, maybe some of you heard me tell this. She used to come every day to see the progress of the buildings. After all, $4 million was a lot to invest, and she came up every day to see what the progress was. And one day she was at the front door of Founders, and the workman was hanging the wrought iron doors there. And I don't know if he was perturbed or annoyed at this woman inspecting his work, but after a while he said, "Ma'am, it seems to me you think these doors are going to last for 100 years. And she typically, "My good man, for 300 years. And we're only in our, guess, if it's 69th year here at USD. But I often think about that. We're headed for 300, and I hope this vision, or this really founding vision of beauty, goodness, and truth persists or continues for 300 and beyond. So thank you very much.